every Thanksgiving table? The proper temperature for poultry is 180. I don't take a bite until I know I'm not going to get food poisoning. Yeah, I'd like to speak with the fire chief, please. I just want to make sure you guys have a full staff on Thanksgiving, right? I'm thinking you too. Gobble, gobble.
I think Connect 4, oldie but a goodie. I mean, last year I came up with this drink called Plymouth on the Rocks. 2 parts whiskey, 2 parts rum, 1 part fireball!
I always cut the turkey. I do it better than anyone. Therefore, I will not surrender this particular Thanksgiving task. For some reason, they didn't sit me next to Uncle Johnny, which is crazy because we have the best political debates. I look forward to that every year. Apparently, last year somebody cried. If you can't talk about politics with your family, what can you talk about? Political discourse is the backbone of this country, and therefore should be a part of every family conversation. Hashtag stirring the pot. Hashtag stirring the mashed potatoes.
The thing to remember about Thanksgiving is that arguments can start at any time. There's politics, for goodness sake. There's Grandpa Wilbur's estate this year to go over. Uncle Brian forgot his side dish, and now we don't have a vegetable. Someone developed a gluten allergy and didn't tell me. But this year I have a really good strategy. When things start to heat up, I have a way to cool it right down. We are the world. We are the children. We are the ones to make a brighter day. So let's start giving.
Well, that's Thanksgiving. Briefly. By the way, in case you didn't know, Unity in the Gold Country is celebrating its 20th anniversary in 2 weeks' time. And we have Carly DePross and Julie and Curtis from the original membership. Wow. So we have some people here this morning who are that old. Okay, so we'll just go through some of these slides again. That what I'm looking at is the deeper dive into the Enneagram from the spiritual point of view, which when we get through all of the numbers, we'll really get into that. And Thursday, I read a whole section of it and was just blown away by this deeper presentation. It's absolutely wonderful. So I'm looking forward to that. We know that it is an Enneagram of personality also. There's the original gram. And for the people who have not been here before, here are the 9 characters, so to speak. The perfectionist is the 1, the 2 is the helper, the 3 performer, the 4 the romantic, 5 is the investigator, 6 is the royalist, 7 is the enthusiast, 8 is the challenger, and 9 is the peacemaker. And there are other names as well, so you will see different titles for the different positions. We talked very briefly last week about how each number has 2 wings. So whatever your number is, the ones on either side of that should also be familiar to you, and you should draw on some of the characteristics of those 2 types. And then we talked about how there are 3 centers, 3 energetic centers. Up here, the 1s, the 9s, and the 8s are the gut, or the body, instinctive center, so they're going with their intuition, with their instinct. And over here then, the 2s, 3s, 4s are in the feeling center. And then we have the head, the thinking center for the 5, 6, and 7. So that's another way perhaps to find your way into your number is, you know, do you resonate with the head, the heart, or the gut? And then there are sort of 3 predominant feelings. The 1s, the 9s, the 8. The gut is anger. They're dealing with anger. They're either projecting it out, they're avoiding it. See, I put it into airplane.
It was actually notifications. We turned off my notifications. That's what that is notifications.
Ah, okay. So, and then the 1s are controlling it. And then we have the 2s, the 3s, and the 4s, whose predominant feeling is shame, and the 5, 6, and 7 predominant feeling is fear. Now, That's not to say that you don't have all of these emotions. Of course you do. But, and then again, we talked about how the 9s are all gut, the 3s are all heart, the 6s are all head. And the other numbers have a leg in 2 centers, like the 1 is gut and heart, the helper is heart and gut, the 4 is heart and head, the 5 is head and heart, the 7s are head and gut, and the 8 is gut and head. Now the strange thing is that even though the 3s are really in the heart center, it's actually a blind spot for them. And even though the 6s are in the head, the thinking is also a blind spot for them, and the 9 is, it's a blind spot for their gut, strangely enough. But we'll get into all that down the road. Okay, I'm just going to skip ahead here.
Hey, Jerry?
Yep.
A couple of us want to know what you mean by a blind spot.
Well, even though you say that you know, you're predominantly in your gut, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're more in touch with your gut than others. It's just that that's the access point for you naturally, but it doesn't mean that you're necessarily paying attention. So it's like you're not necessarily going there. You're not listening to your instincts.
But it's where your instincts would take you.
Yes.
Without any blockage.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, that's real strange because I thought I just said to myself, okay, we're going to have to work around that.
You have to take yourself off of airplane mode, sorry about that.
You mean I can't be in the air? Off airplane. Okay. And now go to notifications.
Notifications, turn off those and
Okay. Show previews? No. Next or always? Never? Try that. Okay. So what do I do?
I think you're good.
Think I'm good. Okay. All right, this is the 5 speaking. He knows everything.
Realizing that.
He's a nice 5 because he's sharing his information with me. Sorry,
That's appropriate. You're supposed to get messages.
I am, but I don't want messages.
Well, that's a different
Because J. Powell is sending me something that I don't want everybody reading. Okay, let's go to the app, and let's go this way. I had some slides for the 2 that I had made up. And I realize you're not really going to be able to see this, but I will read from it, and it's a prompt for me, basically. All right, so we're dealing with the type 2 on the Enneagram. It's the helper, it's the giver, the supporter, the lover, and they're, let me read from here about the 2. As a source of love in the world, the open-heartedness of 2s is rooted in their essence, their true self. 2s are gracious and generous, naturally giving of themselves, usually in the most befitting ways. 2s find themselves navigating a fear of being rejected in their relationships. This fear of rejection, in a sense, is an echo of the pain they felt from an experience of feeling rejected by their protective caregiver. So there is, we know, there is this childhood wound, supposedly, that puts us into our type. And we have 2, of course, we have 2 people, 2 parents usually. One is the sort of nourishing caregiver, the other is the protective caregiver. So like my mom was she was a 2, she was very nurturing and loving and kind. My dad would be the protective, more 9-ish, 1-ish energy. So you can react to one or the other of them. I guess you can react to both of them too. You could have both of them not fulfill what you were looking for. You didn't feel protected, by whichever one was the protector, or you didn't feel nourished by whichever one was the designated nourisher. And so from that then comes your coping mechanism. You're going to try to find protection, you're going to try to find caregiving based on your experience with your parent or whoever was in that role. Because their childhood wound involves the pain of trying to suppress their own needs, twos experience deep shame when forced to acknowledge their own needs or to ask for their needs to be met. So that's a big thing for the two. They're so busy taking care of everybody else, looking after everybody else's needs. And it's really a denial of the fact that they have needs. And so they don't want to look at that. And when they're forced to look at that, then it feels very shameful to them. I was telling you about that first experience I had with my friend who was sitting next to me, who was a 2. I mean, she was having like a heart attack next to me on the seat when she recognized that she was a 2, and that, you know, all of her giving and all of her loving wasn't as altruistic as she thought it was. It was shameful. And I mean, when I looked at her, she was like just like bent over almost, you know, wanting to run out of the room. So it can be a very awakening moment for the 2 when they recognize themselves and that they're not this wonderful person that they thought they were. Frequently, 2s will take whatever they can get, convincing themselves that even if they're not being loved the way they want or need, at least they're receiving something. Now you can see how this can build into a very codependent personality type. And some of the research suggests that there are more women 2s than men, that it sort of is, you know, this is a role that women tend to fall into, perhaps. Getting 2s to be honest about what they really need can cause them tremendous stress. I mean, just imagine that. Just acknowledging your needs causes you intense stress. 2s ache, their hearts always breaking for the needs they intuitively recognize in those around them. This ache, however, can be a distraction that keeps them from looking inward at what they want and need. When they do recognize their own needs, their ache is replaced with a new kind of pain as they question whether they really are loved. And that becomes a real, what would you say, like a weak point in their psyche then. It's like all of a sudden they're questioning everything about whether their husband or their wife loves them. Frequently, 2s will ask those with whom they're in relationship, do you really love me? Such a question inevitably comes as a surprise, since 2s are often the most lovable of all Enneagram types. And so I mentioned that before, that for instance, the 1 loves being around 2s, because 2s are so warm and effusive and complimentary and all of that. And so suddenly, if you're married to one of them, for them to suddenly question then whether you love them can be startling, I would say. Traditionally, the basic fear of the 2 is living in a world without love, but perhaps more accurately, it is the fear that they aren't loved for who they are, but only for what they give others. So you can see the trap there. You give and give and give, and then you stop and think, well, are they just loving me because I'm, you know, giving them all this stuff? What if I didn't do all this for them? Would they still love me? You know, I have this conversation with Dennis all the time about Zeke, our dog. Dennis says, oh, he's so loving, you know. I said, yeah, don't feed him for 3 days. Then see what happens. Now, the traditional passion of the 2 is pride, which can be deceiving because the pride of the 2 is more like false humility, or even more specifically, self-abnegation. So 2s are very proud of the fact, deep down inside, that they're doing all this good stuff. And they're not, you know, they're giving up all this stuff for themselves and not focusing on themselves. So there's a real pride deep down inside that they don't always recognize. And again, so when they discover that there are two, then that gets blown up for them. Self-abnegation as the denial of their own needs causes two to put everybody else's needs first. The pride of self-abnegation is fortified by the traditional fixation of two, flattery. So instead of really looking at their own needs and all of that, what did they do? Wow, your hair is so wonderful this morning. What shampoo do you use? What conditioner? Wow, you're all looking so wonderful. And all of that, flattery, which some people lay it on too thick, and you sense it, it just kind of grates. But most of the time, they're very genuine in a sense. They really are people who compliment, and that's a wonderful thing in small doses. But when it becomes, a way of you trying to win people over, then obviously it's a bit of a problem. Now, one of the things that I wanted to say, starting out, is that if you are a 2, then you are linked to the number 4 and the number 8. So if you're an 8 or a 4, you should be paying pretty good attention too about the 2, because you're also linked to this. So the 2, 4, and 8 are linked together. We'll look at that. Let's see. Okay, skip that. So 2s then, who lean towards their one wing. So now on the Enneagram, remember the 1 is up here, then you have the 2, and then you have the 3. So those who have a very strong one wing follow their principles in ways that serve others and often come across as more serious. It's not so much lovey-dovey as it is more sort of organized and maybe planned. 2s with a strong 3 wing, they lean into their very generous nature, like the more outgoing and the more leaning on how they look, because that's very big for the 3. And so they can draw attention to themselves even more than for their good deeds and for all of what they're doing for others. At their best, 2s integrate to the 4. So if you remember there, if you have a diagram in one of the books, you'll see that the 2 has an arrow from the 4 or to the 4, and sometimes they put it either way. So when the 2 is, I'd like to say, in a good spot, they go to the 4. Now, what do we know about the 4? The 4 is very much into their own uniqueness, their specialness, their feeling nature. So this is a good thing, because now the 2, who doesn't deal with their needs and their feelings, is now moving over into a place of health and is using all of those wonderful qualities of the 4 of paying attention to themselves and paying attention to their needs and their feelings. And one of the things that can happen then when they do that is that 2s then become very creative also, because the 4s are the very artistic people on the Enneagram. And so when 2s are more in touch with their needs and their feelings, then there's a flow of energy and they get creative and they become fairly artistic as well. Now, in crisis, however, or in disintegration, the 2s take on the characteristics of the negative side of the 8. And we know that the 8s are very powerful, very strident, pushing outward with their energy. And so, and I have seen this in 2s where it's like a complete flip. And they go from being these lovely teddy bear kind of people to the grizzly bear who is lashing out. I mean, really, it was staggering to me to see this. Nasty, like cutting comments, and that forceful, energetic 8 energy just takes over, and it's not pretty. And you don't want to be on the receiving end of it. And of course, 2s particularly turn on their partners in that way. One of the things that 2s also can do is through their taking care of everybody else's needs and that, can become very manipulative. Because if they think they know what you need, suddenly they will start planning out your life. And this is really important when it comes to parents and their children. And again, I knew a 2, mother bear, who, I mean, she literally said to me one day, well, you know, I think he's going to be a lawyer, and he'll be the doctor, and then he'll be the priest. And I was like, really? And sure enough, she had a son, a lawyer, a doctor, and 2 priests. And it just floored me that someone would actually sort of, you know, be that manipulative in a sense, or directional with their children. Why don't you just let them figure it out for themselves? But 2s can really have that manipulative behind the scenes, trying to nudge you, or situations, you know. So they're the type of people who will get a crowd all worked up and get them on a cause if they think that they know what should happen. Okay, so we're going to, any questions at this time? That's sort of a quick overview.
One of the things I've read about the bloom system, and this is uncomforting to me coming from the mother of the 2, is that, you know, if I thought, how could she not know how loved she was, because I was very expressive. But what I read said, it doesn't necessarily mean they didn't get the message. The message wasn't given, it just wasn't received. So I just wanted to share that with anyone else with the 2 as a child.
Right, and there is, that's a really good point, that in the Enneagram, there is the perception, that's one piece of it. So the person may have gotten the protection and love, but from their point of view, it just wasn't enough. So therefore, their perception is that they didn't get the protection, they didn't get the love, and therefore, they're going to do something about that. Okay? Richard.
The last thing you were talking about the manipulating aspect, is that when you have a wing of 1? Or
Well, let's see. Let's think about this for a second. Sure, Wendy.
Just interject. So
Here, hang on.
Okay, so as I understand the manipulation, because this is a really charged term, and when 2s hear it, it can be very upsetting. Because this is, to the question about the blind spot is kind of like a reality distortion field, where we're not able to acknowledge our emotions, and so we see things differently. So the 2 may not have experienced quite that sense of being loved in the way they needed to get loved. And so the message to themselves was, the only way I can get the kind of love that I need is by being the person who's moving the pieces on the chessboard. Because it's not okay for me to ask for what I need directly. I'm going to therefore kind of work behind the scenes to get people to do the things that I know that they should be doing, right? This is part of that sort of blind spot of not seeing it. And it comes from a very pure desire, which is to love and be loved. But it's conditioned by the way in which they feel, and we all do this, way in which we all feel we need to be loved. So there's this kind of sense of, if I'm going to get something, I need to give something, right? And that's where that sort of idea of manipulation comes from.
Yeah, thank you. Wendy is an expert, so it's good to have an expert. Yeah, so to answer your question about, you know, is it the one wing, or I think the 2 utilizes that sort of clear perception of the one to kind of figure out what's going on. Like, oh, okay, so this is what I need to do. And then at times they utilize the 8 power position to get what they want. Like, it's not enough to kind of figure out that, oh, wait a sec, I didn't get enough love. All right, okay, but this is what I'm going to do to get it. And as Wendy said, I'm going to like put the heat on these people without expressing directly what I need. I'll manipulate them into doing what I need them to do to get what I want. Anybody else? Okay. So let's move around the thing here. So we talked about pride. Pride is an overinflated sense of self in relationship to others. I know what you need and can give it to you better than anyone else. You need me and I don't need anything. And that's a big piece about being needed. You know, you need me in your life. And so, of course, when you don't need them, that's not a good thing. There will be a reaction. And then the flattery, an attitude of being special and wanting special treatment without having to ask for it. This may be exhibited as the opposite attitude of excessive modesty. Flattery. Okay. Now we've kind of talked about the wound, the type 2 wound. These children felt loved only if they were helping or pleasing others. Their personal needs felt selfish. As a result, they closed off their own needs and feelings and tuned into those of others. Love became defined as giving to others, though the love often didn't feel received or reciprocated. So there again is the perception piece. They were trying to get their needs met by giving and loving, and then they expected that someone would really appreciate them, and then the person didn't appreciate them. So they kind of flipped the whole thing. They're going to give and they're going to do all this, you know, and then you will really appreciate them. It says their focus of attention goes to aid the feelings and needs of others and how to meet those needs, especially emotional needs. So they're great in a crisis. They're the people you want with you when you're falling apart, when you're sobbing your guts out, because they will just lap that up. They know that they're playing a vital role there, and they're very good at comforting and putting their arm around you and giving you a hug and rooting for you. And the adjusting the self to be what the other person wants to be. Yeah, so they will bend over backwards, you know, to do whatever they can for you at their own expense. So these 3 numbers, the 2, the 9, and the 7, these sort of are like the positive outlook positions on the Enneagram. They try to be very up, very positive. You get that from, the giving and all of that. You get that from the 7, of course, with their exuberance and life is fun. And then you get it from the 9 in that, life is peaceful and we're all getting along. So there is that positive spin on things from these 3 positions. And then on the other hand, we have the 1s, the 2s, and the 6s who are at the same time kind of compliant. The way that they play the game, the way that they play their hand, if you will, is to kind of be compliant around others. Be there for them so that they'll need you. Create a sense of security so that people will feel safe around you. 1s, be insightful, be the doers, be the achiever, all of that stuff. so that, again, people will feel good about your insight and your ability to see really well and to do things. Getting confused here between the screen and this. So the main theme for the 2, and some of this is repetitious, but you're hearing it maybe in different ways, and therefore it will sink in differently. Survival depends on the love and approval of significant others. Being connected in relationship is the main focus and primary concern. So the 2s are all about relationships. If you're all about relationships, if you spend most of your energy and time figuring out, focusing, analyzing, that's a good indicator that you're probably in the 2 position. Emphasis on what others needs, that's again a big theme. Helping the important cause or person in your life. And this may lead to being overextended, dependent, or manipulative. And one of the biggest challenges for the 2 is not to take on too much. And they do. They overextend everywhere. And so they're just running. They're running to keep up with all these commitments. And of course, if someone calls in the middle of all that, they have to drop everything and go to that person. So, it's not good. Characteristics, most purely intrapersonal of all the types. And because of this, because they're not in touch with themselves, they suffer from a sense of lack of identity. Define the self by what they do for others. Their roles trump feelings. Multiple selves, they're chameleons, adapting to loved ones' needs, seeking to secure connections, can be boundaryless. So we all know the importance of having boundaries. They go way past their boundaries many, many times and can become codependent. They struggle for personal freedom. They feel controlled by other people's needs. And of course that makes great sense, wouldn't you? And that brings up the anger then. Like when there's a breaking point, as I said before, the phrase that they'll often use is, after everything I've done for you, after the good friend that I was, ... That's when they lash out. They seeks approval and avoids rejection, wants to be indispensable, tends to others' needs while hiding their own, can play the martyr. Yes. So this is your kind of typical Jewish mother kind of character. Also, I was looking, and again, these things are, they're not hard and fast, but in terms of countries, it says that Italy is a 2 country. Maybe Israel. So their giving is manipulative, gives in order to get, often unaware of that. And that's as I said before, the thing that really surprises them. Like they just are blind to the fact that all of what they're doing is really all about them, not about you. They overgive, angry when not